Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Trollhunters Tales of Arcadia. Okay, so this episode is probably one of the more important ones, at least character-wise, because, there are things in this episode that continue the ongoing romance with Claire and Jim, which is kind of important for character development. There's some new lore-related things and story-related things that continue the story of Killahead Bridge, but the reason I bring this up character-wise is because this is the episode where we find out about what happened to Jim's dad. And, we've known for a while that Jim's dad just kind of left, walked out on his family, and those kinds of things. He disappeared. And, we kind of find out a little bit more details about what happened, because this episode takes place on the entirety of Jim's birthday. So, that is what the premise of the episode is. But, in case the episode does open up with a POV shot of a creature that we don't quite get to see right away, but we do find out a little bit more about it. In case Jim wakes up and he kind of wakes up in a cold sweat because he becomes panicked that he's being watched. But it's at this point where his mom comes in with some homemade pancakes, and what we quickly find out is there's a reason that Jim prepares all the meals around the house, because what we find out is that Barbara Lake is not a good cook. It's heavily implied because, Jim is the guy who makes all the meals for the house, but Barbara is not a great cook, and Jim kind of notices that she's doing her best, but she brings in some special birthday pancakes and wishes him a very happy birthday and their very special day, and also tells him that it's going to be a big day for him, and that he can't sleep in, and she's going to tell him all the different, and then they're just going to make plans to do all of the different things when she gets out from work and he gets home from school, respectively. But in case Jim is a little concerned about the pancakes because the way the pancake syrup is laid out, it looks like the pancakes are in incredible agony, and we find out later they're not very good. So in a way they kind of are, but of course she points out that they're just excited, and she knows that he traditionally doesn't like his birthday very much, but points out that it'll be different and that they'll do something special and fun together, and that nobody deserves to be alone on their big day. At which point she goes downstairs and tells him that when he's done with breakfast, she has a very special surprise for him waiting. And of course, Jim then proceeds to kind of slowly finish his breakfast, and when he suddenly gets a call over his walkie-talkie from Toby. And of course Toby tells Jim to look outside his window, and Jim does look outside his window and sees a massive sees that Toby is holding a massive sign shaped like a birthday cake but that very visibly has a bite taken out of it. And when Jim jokes about it a little bit, pointing out obviously that there's a big that there seems like a chunk of it got ripped off. So Toby just points out that was just Arg, pointing out that he either thought the cake was real or just likes to taste the paper. If he's a troll, so Toby isn't entirely sure which. But in case it's a really fun joke. But in case it's at this point where Jim asks if he's heard anything back from Claire, and of course Jim sarcastically points out he hasn't heard anything, but it's not like he trashed her house or anything, and which she points out yes, he did. But and of course he would be surprised if she ever talked to him again. But of course, Toby points out that it'll be fine and that things will eventually work out and smooth over, but he just needs to make an effort with her. At which point his Nana calls from the other room, telling him that the litter box is empty and that it shouldn't be empty. And it's at this point where Toby realizes that Arg ate the kitty litter again, and then hangs up to go change the kitty litter, which Jim is visibly annoyed about. So he goes home. So it's at this point where Jim then proceeds to close the walkie-talkie, and it's at this point where Jim then decides to go downstairs, and case in point is what I pointed out earlier. Barbara's currently half-heartedly eating some of the pancakes she made, and it's become apparent, and it is becoming apparent that she's not very good because she doesn't particularly like the flavor of the pancakes she's made. She eats some of it, makes a weird face, and then immediately decides against eating them when Jim comes downstairs, and it's a really funny visual gag. But in any case, she points out that that of course the special surprise is already for him, and she then tells Jim that's in the garage and that they're going to have to wait. That she'll have to wait for her while she gets it started up. So she runs up to the garage, and Jim immediately thinks, oh my, I think I know what my mom got me. And of course he proceeds to pull out a motorcycle magazine, and of course he then picks up the motorcycle magazine that he keeps around the house and tucks it under his arm, and is convinced that his mom had gotten him one of them. And of course Barbara adds to that he's going to be getting a lot of mileage out of it, which of course only gets him even more excited. But Jim runs out into the garage and quickly discovers that no, she got him a food processor, which of course he's visibly disappointed about, and she notes that he seems to hate it, but he points out that it's a great gift. But then she notices the magazine tucked under his arm, and she quickly realizes that she led him on by accident, pointing out that she told him to come out to the garage, that he would get a lot of mileage out of it, and she pointed out that she just got it for him because it's from all the different cooking shows and things that he's watched. So for that reason, she thought that he would like it. And he does point out that while he is disappointed it's not a Vespa, he admits that he wanted a food processor as well. So he points out that it's perfectly fine. And that he will absolutely use it. But then the base of it falls off, and he quickly realizes that he'll have to pick it up and put it back together later. But of course, Barbara reassures Jim that one of these days she will in fact get him a Vespa. She'll let him buy a Vespa and drive around on it. But does also points out that she does find them incredibly nerve-wracking, and because she notes that him driving around a Vespa is probably not, safe. But in case she then proceeds to tell, it's at this point where Toby proceeds to barge in, clearly frantic about something, and he makes a big play, and it's heavily implied that what he's worried about is Troll Market. But then he notices Barbara's in the garage with Jim, and tries to play it off as this thing that isn't actually an emergency at all. And obviously he's not doing a great job of that, but Barbara doesn't really suspect anything, and she goes back in the house after Toby admires Jim's food processor. At which point Toby then insists that there's an emergency at Troll Market, and that's something, and it's a DEFCON 1 emergency. He needs to get down to Troll Market right away. And of course Jim is confused as to what exactly it is that Toby's talking about, but he decides to follow Toby to Troll Market anyway. At which point they go to the Hero's Forge, and it's at this point where Blinky tells Jim that that's a major emergency, and of course Jim immediately notices that the entirety of the Hero's Forge is just going off. That all of the different gauntlet weapons are going overboard. All the different platforms are moving around when they shouldn't be. And it's at this point where Blinky tells him that Arg has gone berserk, which confuses Jim endlessly, because Arg is supposed to be at Toby's house. So, and of course, sure enough, Arg just kind of barges out of nowhere, and immediately tries to attack Jim, which of course Jim is very confused and doesn't summon his weapon right away, and he tries to summon his armor to defend himself, but then it's revealed that the entire thing was just a ruse to get Jim to come to the Hero's Forge for a birthday celebration, and sure enough, the Hero's Forge has been decked out with balloons. It raises up from the floor. There's balloons hanging from the floating platforms, and it's just, and all the other trolls that Blinky knows came in to wish Jim a happy 16th birthday, and it's a big deal. And of course, Toby, and of course, eventually, Arg admits that he was just acting, and that he points out that thinks he did a really good job at it. And Arg was very convincing, because it does feel like Arg had suddenly just gone berserk and started attacking everybody, which Jim knows isn't really a thing. So, because especially since it's Arg, but of course, Toby thanks that. But of course, Blinky then proceeds to celebrate Jim's 16th birthday and tells him that that's a big milestone for Trollkind because that's the day they learn to control their bowels, which gross. And Jim probably didn't need to know that information, but he still appreciates the sentiment nonetheless. However, there is exactly one troll who isn't happy and celebrating, and that's Vendel. Vendel comes in and just sees all the balloons and everything just hanging from the Hero's Forge, and concludes that it's been reduced to a simple mockery, and points out that it's not really appropriate for the Hero's Forge to be decked out in all this, things. And of course, he then proceeds to pop one of the balloons, specifically the one that Jim had picked up, but. And of course, Arg just kind of returns to sentiment, pointing out the balloons seem pop, and of course he takes a bite out of one to confirm that. But of course, Vendel points out that this is no time for merrymaking, and that they need to absolutely work on they need to work on Jim's training, and that's what the Hero's Forge is for, not just randomly celebrating a day out of the blue. That's not what it's for, and of course, Vendel, being his grouchy self, then proceeds to leave and go elsewhere, and but not before telling Blinky to clean all the balloons up. And of course, Blinky does conclude that Vendel is right, and and pointing out that obviously he's very right about Jim's training, and that they do need to continue working on making him a better troll hunter. But of course, Jim quickly picks up on the fact that it doesn't seem like that Vendel knows about Not Enrique yet. And of course, Blinky does confirm that yes, it is indeed a thing. But he also points out that Vendel doesn't seem to think they have a changeling problem, and for that and while he would love to show him Not Enrique and even get Not Enrique's help in the matter, he does point out for the time being, Vendel doesn't really seem concerned about it, so they'll have to find a way to break the news to him some other time. For the time being, they do decide to actually continue with Jim's training, and the exercise that Blinky has Jim go through is to catch Arg without using his Sword of Daylight. And that's essentially what the thing is. And the premise and the idea here is that Jim is supposed to use the Hero's Forge and by extension his environment as a weapon to try and catch Arg and corner him. And of course that's the entire premise of what he's supposed to do. But it quickly becomes apparent that Jim is clearly struggling and his mind is clearly elsewhere. And of course, Blinky wonders why it's happening, because obviously he points out it's Jim's birthday. That should have improved his mood and made him a lot better at fighting and doing the obstacle course that he set up before him. But it's at this point where Toby then proceeds to point out that that's not really in the case for Jim, pointing out that birthdays have never really been Jim's thing, and of course, Blinky is confused, pointing out that, humans have very short lifespans compared to trolls, and he points out that he would figure that humans would savor every last one. And of course, Toby then proceeds to point out that that's not exactly the case for Jim, because as he points out, Jim's birthday was the day that Jim's father walked out and disappeared. And of course, Blinky doesn't fully understand at first, thinking that Jim Senior was some sort of magician, but it's at this point where Toby then proceeds to explain to Blinky what happened. And pointing out that it's not so much that he was a magician disappeared, more like he walked out because he's a deadbeat disappeared. And then proceeds to go on to explain what exactly happened on Jim's 5th birthday. On Jim's 5th birthday, Jim Mike Sr. bought him a bike kit for his birthday. Proceed to tell them that they would build it together and that would be a fun father-son bonding project. And then he immediately just walked out and never came back. And for that reason, Jim, and that explains Jim's entire driving force between wanting a Vespa and also pointing out that he is not really, enthusiastic about the whole situation with his birthday, because his father walked out on him on his birthday, and for that reason he's wanted a Vespa, and the Vespa parts have just laid in his garage for years. They have never actually, built the Vespa together, which is really sad. But he points out that he had just moved at the time and had found out, and And of course, the last he knew of about Jim's father, Jim Lang Sr. had actually moved out to Vermont and became a ski bum, and they have not heard from him since. So of course, Blinky is obviously very disturbed to hear this. Pointing out that he realizes it's a horrible tragedy, made all the more horrible by the fact that he didn't know at all. So yeah, he quickly realizes that obviously he realizes now that Jim's moon will probably never really be improved on his birthday, and for that reason, and quickly learns the secrets of that. But in any case, Jim continues with his training off screen. Meanwhile, it's at this point where we find out that Blar and Strickler have been using a mine as a makeshift base. And what we find, and of course, they go out into the empty mine cave thing that they hang out in, and of course, Strickler quickly notices a scale on the ground, and he quickly realizes that Blar has summoned something that he probably shouldn't have, and it's at this point where he proceeds to berate Blar because he realizes that what Blar has summoned is a stalkling, which of course he points out is a bad idea and wonders why Blar has even summoned it in the first place. And Blar points out that it's to do the job that they've been trying to do the whole time, and which is to get rid of the Trollhunter. But and of course Strickler then proceeds to demand to know why he thought this was still a good idea, pointing out that it would cause too much scrutiny if a human disappeared, whether a human suddenly died or something like that. And of course, Blar points out that that's exactly why he summoned the Stalkling. Because the Stalkling, once it marks his prey, will just snatch him up in the middle of the night, and then he will just disappear, and nobody will ever hear from him again. But of course, Strickler points out that the problem with Stalklings is that they're both uncontrollable and unpredictable, and he points out for that reason that it was probably a bad idea to summon one, because they have no idea what it'll actually do to Jim or anybody else in his immediate vicinity for that matter. It could cause some serious problems, but of course, at this point where Blar points out that that the reason he summoned the Stalkling in the first place is that he's just tired of waiting in the shadows while Jim gets further and further to being able to dismantle their end goal of releasing Dunmar, and for that reason he decided to take a more proactive approach and finish Jim once and for all. Although Strickler just continued to express his disappointment, but at this point there's not really much he can do because now the Stalkling is just kind of loose. But Of course, it's at this point where, sure enough, it then proceeds to once again continue to follow Jim, and we do find out that the Stalkling is actually the one that's been doing the POV shots this whole time. But of course, it then proceeds to follow Jim to an alley where he meets with Toby, and it's revealed that Toby actually has a plan in place that he wants to try and run by Jim. And of course, Jim notices that Toby is holding a massive folder full of documents, and wonders if they're going to sue someone. And of course, Toby points out that I'm able to do that tomorrow, but then asks Jim for his wallet so he can finish up some things. And of course, Jim is a little confused, pointing out that Toby doesn't seem to know how this gift thing works. But Toby tells him to trust him, and he does. So at which point he pulls out Jim's ID, and he then cackles maniacally, which of course just annoys Jim. But then after going through and getting all the documents out of Jim's wallet that he needs, he then proceeds to hand the wallet back to Jim, and then proceeds to take him to get his next present. Which, as we find out, Toby had previously went to a Vespa dealership to try and get Jim a test drive for a Vespa. And of course, what we find out is that the dealer had actually previously talked to Toby, and then proceeded to turn him away because Toby didn't have any of the proper documentation the previous time that they were there. But then Toby proceeds to pull out the huge folder that he has, revealing that all the documentation he has now is in order. He has he has the learner's permit, the 2 forms of ID, all the things that he needs. And And of course, while the guy is visibly impressed by the fact that Toby now has all the proper documentation, he also points out that since Jim is only 16, he still needs a signature from a parent. But then Toby asks him if the signature from Mr. Washington or Mr. Lincoln would be acceptable, proceeding to pull out a couple of crumpled dollar bills from his pocket. And well, the guy is obviously very skeptical and doesn't really think that this is appropriate. Against his better judgment, he decides to let Jim drive the Vespa around for 10 minutes and points out that if it has a scratch on it, he's dead. And of course, Jim is very happy about the fact that Toby got him a test drive with a Vespa for his birthday, so he can kind of get a feel for it and figure out what it's like to drive one around. And he then proceeds to go off on a side road where he starts driving around. Only to quickly notice that something is clearly following him, and he gets a glimpse of something in the mirror, but he isn't entirely sure what it is or what's even following him. But and of course, he quickly realizes that something is attacking him, and that something is going to try and attack him while he's on his Vespa. And of course, is this point where as he's looking around for the stalkling, he notices Steve in his rearview mirror, much to his chagrin, because Steve immediately shows up. And immediately starts boasting and bragging about himself, and pointing out that he knew that Jim wanted to be his understudy, but he didn't think that Jim wanted to be him that badly. But of course, Jim tells Steve that he doesn't really have time for this right now. Pointing out that he's obviously trying to find whatever's trying to chase him. But of course, Steve points out that if he doesn't have time for him or wanting to race him, he's clearly looking for a race. But Jim points out that that's absolutely not what he's looking for, and that he's just trying to be rid of Steve. He just wants Steve to get the hell out of there because clearly something is wrong. But Steve, of course, doesn't fully understand what Jim's talking about. He just kind of goes on a race and tries to beat Jim in a race. But and of course, this causes him and Jim to drive into front of oncoming traffic. This causes Steve to actually go off the road and crash while he's too busy trying to chase Jim. And of course he also seemingly sees the stalking as well, because he clearly hears something. He clearly figures out that Jim is being chased. That he clearly hears the stalking and doesn't really understand what's going on. But he does panic and winds up going off the road either way. But of course, it's not fully clear if he knows yet. But it's clear that he realizes now that Jim is panicked about something. But he does go off the road regardless, and this leaves Jim alone to deal with the stalkling. And of course, at this point, we're actually going to see a good glimpse of the stalkling, and it does proceed to attack Jim and tries to run him off the road. And Jim, of course, once Steve is out of the way, so to speak. Jim is able to successfully summon his armor to defend himself and chases off the stalkling. And the stalkling he does manage to wound the stalkling, and the stalkling proceeds to leave, but not before breaking the mirror on the Vespa that Jim is renting. And then proceeds to fly, and while injured, it then proceeds to fly off. And Jim then proceeds to breathe a sigh of relief and then drives off. Meanwhile, down in Troll Market, we find out that Arg and Blinky are very much trying to meet with Vendel, revealing that they have something very important that they would like to show him. And while Vendel, of course, points out that he's not really interested, that they shouldn't really stop looking on it for the troll they were trying to see on his account. They do eventually reveal that what they want to show. And of course, this is this point where they reveal that they have Not Enrique in a bag, and of course, Not Enrique is visibly annoyed about being manhandled, and then asks Vendel if he's ever seen a changeling, he acts like he's never seen a changeling before, and it's at this point where Vendel then proceeds to pull him off to the side, and very obviously realizing that they brought a changeling into their midst, and of course they do quickly point out that this is obviously a very big problem, because he tells them to put Not Enrique back where he came from, pointing out that he could very easily incite a panic. But and of course, Arg does eventually put Not Enrique back in the bag, although Not Enrique, before he goes back in the bag, then points out that the only reason he came down there is because they promised him socks to eat, and they point out that he'll get them later. with not Enrique adding that there better be Argyle, but they put him back in the bag, but then Arg promptly lose not Enrique and tries to look for him, and eventually does find him, because not Enrique just kind of disappears for a brief minute, but and of course, at this point, where Vendel asks Blinky what he's even trying to do, pointing out that obviously if they put it, that they can't bring a changeling into their mist because that would incite panic. And of course Blinky points out that this is actually good news because now it means they have proof that the Killerhead Bridge is being rebuilt. But of course Vendel points out that this is obviously a problem because obviously if it means Killerhead Bridge is being built, then that's also going to incite a panic. And that they need to do this discreetly, not what Blinky just did of bringing a changeling into their midst. But he also points out that he can deny it no longer, and that he realizes that obviously the bridge has been built underneath their very noses, and he does point out that for that reason he should probably be very, very careful about what kinds of situation about what could happen. But he also points out that if Gunmar's exiles are undone underneath their very noses, it could spell disaster. And he does point out that the only thing that they currently have to defend them is Jim, and he points out that Jim isn't quite there yet. But of course Blinky points out, objects, pointing out that Jim, in the face of danger, can obviously face any sort of challenge thrown at him, and shows steadfast bravery, and that it'll probably be fine. Of course, it's this point where Jim then proceeds to barge into Hartshorn's troll market and reveals that he was attacked by a Stockling, and proceeds to and starts panicking about it. And of course that doesn't really put Vendel's mind at ease. But of course Jim points out the very obvious problem that it had large wings and could move and was following around. And of course, as Arg finally finds not Enrique clinging to his back and finally puts him back in his little sack, he then concludes that what Jim saw was a Stockling. And of course, Jim has no idea what that means, but he does point out that the Stockling was able to move around in daylight, and that he's a little confused as to how it's able to move around in daylight. And of course, at this point where Vendel actually pulls out brief recapitulation of Troll Lore, Volume 47, and proceeds to tell Jim that. Brain proceeds to use it as a visual aid to tell Jim that Stocklings are actually one of the very few species of troll kinds that can thrive in daylight. And he tells them that they're one of those things that they're one of the few creatures that can, because they're also one of the few creatures that will relentlessly pursue their prey and eventually drag them off. And of course, when Jim looks at the picture, he concludes that looks nearly sufficiently less scary than the thing that attacked him. But of course, Vendel points out that that's a sign of how good a hunter the Stockling is, pointing out that the Stockling anybody who has faced against a Stockling hasn't really lived long enough to depict it, so they only have a very rudimentary sketch of what it looks like. And of course, that doesn't really put Jim's mind at ease. But Jim does point out that even if it chased him, he was able to fend it off with his sword. Pointing out that he was able to escape despite that. And Vendel, of course, at this point where Blinky then decides to kind of use that opportunity to just paint Jim as this very brave, valiant troll hunter who, even though Jim tries to point out that he just got lucky, but of course Blinky shuts him up and continues to just kind of play into Jim's strengths, and continues to tell Vendel that Jim is this brave, powerful troll hunter who can easily take on a Stockling and live. And of course, Vendel points out that for that very reason, he hopes Jim can take care of it, because Jim, of course, because if he's ever left alone with it, because if he's ever followed around by a Stockling, they will eventually hunt him till death. So he better be prepared to just kind of, prepare to defend himself and make sure he's never alone with it. And of course, this is this point where Jim proceeds to panic and realizes that that's obviously a very big problem. And of course, Jim realizes that he'll need to buddy up with people. So later that day at school, because this is all taking place in the morning, Jim then proceeds to get ready. Jim proceeds to go on to get close to go and open up his locker. And what we quickly find out from Toby is that the guy has apparently figured out that the mirror on the Vespa was broken. The dealership guy. And he quickly and when Jim realizes that he knows the mirror and now that he now owes the guy money, he wonders how much he actually owes him. And Jim and Toby just tells him that he owes all the $300 that he paid, and that the guy wants all of it. And of course, Jim is very visibly distraught by this, but also points out that Toby then proceeds to point out that if Jim has actually figured out a solution for the Stalkling, and Jim points out that for the very obvious thing that Jim isn't allowed to be alone ever with the Stalkling, as been previously pointed out. So he concludes that the best way to deal with all of this, is to just make sure he's never alone. So what he's gonna do is Toby will ride to school with him every day, which of course will help. But then he can ask his mom to pick him up at late at night so that he doesn't have to travel home alone. And then obviously they'll obviously just be palling around and going through school anyway. So he will never be alone at school. So it'll be fine. But of course, Toby points out the problem that there's a very good possibility that the Stalkling may never leave him alone, and Jim muses that maybe it'll get bored. But although the way he laughs at it implies that he's not that confident that the Stalkling will eventually leave him alone. But of course, it's at this point where Toby points out the very obvious problem is that eventually Jim will have to go to the bathroom, and he's not going to chaperone him in the bathroom. But of course, at this point where Claire then proceeds to walk up to Jim, and of course Jim is confused, pointing out that she said she never wanted to speak with him again, but she said that she hoped she would never have to speak with him again, but points out that this is a bit of an emergency, and of course it's at this point where Toby realizes that Jim now has his chaperone and proceeds to leave and tells Jim that he'll call him if he ever needs to go to the bathroom. And of course, it's at this point where Jim then proceeds to where Jim and Claire then proceed to kind of smooth things over, considering the whole house situation. Obviously, Claire is very visibly distraught about how her house was torn apart, and that and obviously her parents are very upset with her, and do point out that she, of course, is very lucky that she only got grounded because of Jim, and that she probably would have gotten in a lot less trouble if Jim had let Enrique get kidnapped. And of course, Jim points out that that's a funny story, but he kind of interrupts himself and apologizes, pointing out that he shouldn't have used her house to throw a rave. And she does accept his apology finally, but she also points out something interesting that she's picked up in the meantime, pointing out that saying that since Jim had quote-unquote thrown a rave at her house, she had since asked around with everybody at school, i.e. everybody Jim should know, and would ask to come over. But what she quickly find out is that nobody had actually said that they were with Jim at her house. So for that reason, so she points out that that the whole rave story is kind of fishy, and wonders what exactly Jim was really doing at her house. And Jim doesn't really give a clear answer as to what's going on, pointing out that and since he knows that he can't really tell her the truth about what's going on, when that he's the troll hunter and all these other things, and he does talk about it with Toby a little bit earlier, but he does but he does decide to keep quiet. So it's at this point where we turn out that he doesn't have to give an explanation, because at this point Miss Janet barges out and tells Jim that rehearsal is in 5 and that they need to get ready and take places. And when Jim asks Claire what they're talking about, it's revealed that obviously we know that Steve crashed his Vespa and got into a Vespa accident recently during this episode. So for that reason, and since Steve is Romeo and therefore is kind of an important person in the role, that means his understudy now has to fill in, which is Jim. And of course Jim is less than enthused about the fact that he now has to stay late to go to play rehearsal, but he does proceed to point out that it'll be fine and that he'll call his mom. At which point he then proceeds to rehearse with Claire, and he gets stuck on one of the lines from the play, which just starts with "Forgive me," and he makes a very big obvious point that he's actually talking to Claire, not Juliet. And she does wind up eventually forgive him for this, but of course, eventually they continue going on with the play. And after concluding that tonight was a great rehearsal, it's at this point where Miss Janet dismisses everyone from the play rehearsal and tells everyone that she'll see them all later, and that they need to just continue practicing their lines. And of course, at this point, where Jim points out that he's great, that he's very happy to have had a rehearsal, but and of course it starts raining at this point, Jim is obviously very concerned about what's going on with the stockling, because he at that point hears the stockling crying out underneath the cover on the rainstorm. And of course, Claire then proceeds to wonder if Jim is all right, because Jim is very obviously panicked. And Jim plays it up that he's just worried about the weather when he's obviously worried about something worse. He does point out that he's got his mom coming to pick him up, but does point out for the time being that they can keep her company, and that maybe he can walk her home. But she points out that obviously her parents would kill him if he walked her home. So for that reason, she probably shouldn't have him walk home at all. So for that reason, so she declines. But she does point out that maybe they can keep each other company at least. But she points out that her parents are already there to pick her up. So and of course Jim is panicked because that means he'll be home alone. So because that means he'll be alone by himself with the stockling. So Claire then proceeds to get into her parents' car. At which point he gets a call from his mom, and it's revealed that his mom can't actually come to pick him up, which causes him to panic even more. Because as we find out, it's heavily implied that it's Steve's fault she's late. But she points out that Steve had gotten into a crash with his Vespa. She had to stay late to do the X-rays, and for that reason can't go home. And for that reason, and of course Jim realizes that and she tells Jim that he has his bike and that he'll be fine. So she then proceeds to hang up. But this causes Jim to panic even more because he doesn't want to be alone. He's got a stockling after him. So he's desperate. He then proceeds to run up to the Nunes' car and proceeds to knock on the window and asks if he can have a ride home. And of course, obviously the Nunes' don't like Jim very much. And of course, Claire then proceeds to mouth from the back seat asking him what he's doing, but they just close the window on the car and drive away and leave him alone with the stockling. But it's very funny. But of course, it's a fun visual gag as well. But in any case, realizing he's now on his own, he then realizes that he's going to just have to make his way home on bike, and proceeds to call Toby and let him know what's going on. But of course, Toby is too busy playing Go-Go Sushi with Art to notice the phone right away. So he realizes that he's on his own and has to fend off the stockling by himself. And of course, they proceed to drive the stockling over past the canal, and they proceed to ride on his bike. And Jim proceeds to vent his frustration over the fact that he's currently being chased around by a stockling. And of course points out that normally, if he were normal people on their 16th birthday, he would have gotten a Vespa, but no, he had to get this is a quote from the episode, but he had to get a food processor and a giant flying troll, which of course is very, very hilarious. But it's at this point where he gets snatched up where he eventually gets attacked by the stockling and snatched up, and of course he winds up being chased away by. But before that, he manages to actually successfully call Toby, whose power has finally gone out because of the storm. And Toby complains about it a little bit before finally realizing Jim's been trying to call him. And when he finally picks up, he gets a very panicked call from Jim and realizes that they need to hurry him to hell up and get to Jim's location. So he tells Art what's going on, and they leave. And sure enough, by this point, Jim has been snatched up by the stockling by the canal and is being carried into the air. And Jim is successful in summoning his armor, but isn't really able to get a good grip, deliver a good blow on the stockling, because obviously the stockling is trying to pick him up. And obviously Jim realizes if he kills the stockling, he's probably going to be dropped. So he realizes that he's in a bit of a catch-22. He needs to kill the stockling to defend himself, but also he realizes that if he does, he'll probably fall and go splat. So he's very much stuck in a bad position. But fortunately at this point, Fortunately, at this point, Arg and Toby show up, and they quickly realize that Jim is being dragged away by the old Stockling. And Jim is currently struggling, mainly because he can't get a good hit on the Stockling, and also the aforementioned Catch-22, but also the air is getting thinner up where they are. And Jim realizes he's going to pass out if this goes on much longer. But then he remembers what Blinky told him during training, that the environment, that if in the case where he doesn't have a weapon, the environment can be his weapon. And then he recognizes that they're currently in the middle of a thunderstorm, and he gets a brilliant idea, and proceeds to use the Sword of Daylight and his armor as a lightning rod to kill the Stockling, pointing out that if he's going down, then the Stockling's going down with him. At which point, Lightning proceeds to strike his Sword of Daylight, courses through his armor into the Stockling, and then the Stockling proceeds to turn to stone while Jim proceeds to fall out of the sky. And of course, it quickly realizes because Arg and Toby are quickly on the scene. Arg is able to run over and catch Jim before he falls and manages to grab him. And while the Stockling isn't so lucky, falls to the bottom of the canal and breaks into a million pieces. So, yeah, and of course Jim is fine because of all of this. He's visibly, been electrocuted but he's fine. But of course, with that, there's exactly one new thing that they need to do, and they proceed to bring Jim back to Hearthstone Troll Market, where Blinky themselves then tells them that they have one more surprise for him. But of course, Jim points out that he can't really handle another one of their troll surprises, but does point out that there's only a couple minutes left of his birthday, and points out that it's time for one last birthday present. And sure enough, when Blinky moves his hands away from Jim's eyes, there sits a pile of Vespa parts. And Jim quickly looks around, quickly recognizes that the parts are a 1955 Vespa, and Blinky muses the idea that maybe they could build it together. They could build it together one day, after training, of course. But and Jim proceeds to pull Blinky into a fierce hug, telling him that that's the best present he's ever received or gotten, and proceeds to tell Jim that, and of course Blinky then returns the sentiment, and they do start fiddling with the Vespa somewhat, but then the episode then proceeds to end, and we end on a big story reveal. It's at this point where we're in an airport, and we meet a man named Otto Skarbach, who I think is Austrian, I'm pretty sure, but given his name. But Otto proceeds to walk into the airport, and he talks to the airport lady, and she asks him if his visit is business or pleasure, and she pulls out his thingamabob, telling her that it's a little bit of both. Maybe a little bit of both, and she rolls her eyes at him and asks him if he has anything he'd like to declare. At which point, he then proceeds to say in troll speak, "Long live Gunmar," which of course causes the woman to immediately respond with the exact same phrase. And it's at this point where he reveals what's actually in his briefcase. It's revealed to be the ice stone for Killahid Bridge, which means that they now have pretty much all the parts, and now they can finally fully assemble Killahid Bridge. And of course both of them are very visibly happy about that, pointing out that that means that now they can assemble all the pieces of Killahid Bridge, and now finally set Gunmar free. And that's where the episode ends. But this episode. So yeah, as I said, there's ongoing character drama and story related things. But this episode is mainly about Jim's birthday, and about how Jim struggles about his father and about his birthday, and this also establishes kind of sort of that Blinky kind of sees Jim as Blinky and Jim seem to have a fatherly son relationship forming, kind of sort of, because this was a thing that Jim was supposed to do with his father, and Blinky is just continuing the sentiment here. That is essentially what the episode is. It's just them continuing the sentiment that, they have a bit of a surrogate father-son relationship, and the episode makes that very clear. That's because this was supposed to be a thing that they did on their birthday, and they never did. So, yeah, it's a pretty good character episode. It's probably one of my favorites because this is the one that stands out to me when I go back and remember this series. This one in particular is a very good one. It stands out a lot to me because of the whole origin, because we find out about Jim's father. It establishes the relationship between Blinky and Jim, and seems to imply that they have a very father-sonly relationship, kind of, sort of, or at least they're getting there. And the episode also kind of just continues to establish that Jim is trying to just kind of settle back into his normal life. And then there's the thing with the stalkling, which is really cool because it's set like a horror monster thing, and I love that. But yeah, this episode just stands out to me for a lot of reasons. It is a really fun episode. And it does stand out because this is obviously, like I said, this is a very character heavy episode, and I do kind of like that. But in any case, that is going to do it for today's review, and I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I recommend you always watching the episodes for themselves, because the series is a lot of the things about the series is that about this episode is that there's a lot of POV shots from the Stalkling's point of view that are kind of important for seeing the episode. So I do recommend watching them. But in any case, yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this review. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out. And you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks. Not my way of saying thanks. So be sure to check those out. Link is down in the description. Also, be sure and go and check out my Twitch. Just link is down in the description as well. Please go check that out. Go and check out my Discord as well. I want to hang out with more people over there. I would appreciate that. Go and check out finally go and check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this video. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. And until next time, I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!